In this lesson, we're going to see how to handle web storage events in HTML5. Every time you add an item or remove or change an item in web storage, an event occurs telling you where the change occurred and what the values are. To illustrate this, first of all, we'll see how it works with local storage, and then we'll see that it's kind of the same approach for session storage as well. So to start off, I have a demo file here called local storage events.html, and on the right hand side, I have a window called handling events. This window will detect and display any events that occur on web storage. So for example, back in the left hand window here, if I add an item called name, and I set the value to be Andy, if I click store item, it will add an item into local storage, and the window on the right hand side detects and displays the event. It tells me what kind of storage has been changed. Was it local storage or session storage? It tells me the URL of the page that made the change. So local storage events.html was the file that made the change. It realizes that it's a value that's been added, and it tells me the key and the value of the new item. So the key was name and the value was Andy. Now, if I change the value to be Carl, which is my middle name, and I click store item again, another event occurs, and the window over here picks it up, and it tells me that this time it's a change. The item called name has been changed, and you can see the old value and the new value of that item. Okay, let me add another item called city, and I'll type in here Swansea, so that's my hometown, and I'll click store. So as you might expect, an event occurs over here to tell me that an item's been added into local storage. And then back on the left hand window, if I click remove, then it tells me an item's been removed. So it tells me the city has been removed. The old value was Swansea, but the item has now been removed from local storage. And likewise, and to conclude, if I click on clear items, then it tells me that all the items have been removed from local storage. Now, the way this works with local storage, if you have a page that's been downloaded from this domain, localhost, then it'll handle events from any other page that's come from the same place. So, for example, on the left-hand side window, I have another page here, which does the same kind of thing as the first page. So, for example, I can add an item in here called color, and I can give it a value such as purple, and store item, and an event occurs over here telling me the local storage has changed, and it's been caused by that page. So you can always determine the URL of the page that made the change. This change was made by this page. The other changes have been made by local storage, events.html. Okay, so let's see how all of this works. All of the code for these files are in your project files folder, and I've opened them already in my editor. So let me open that now. So local storage events.html and web storage API.html, those files are kind of regular. They just add items and remove items and change them in local storage. So there's nothing really new to see in there. All the interesting stuff happens in this file here, handling events.html. This is the window that we had on the right hand side. This is the window that was detecting the changes in web storage. So let's see how the code works. First of all, I have an unordered list, which is ready to display all the event information. Basically, every time a web storage event occurs, it'll add a new list item into that list. Okay, so it's empty initially, and then we have some script which sets up the event handling on web storage. So we do this. You take the window object and you handle the onStorage event. That will handle changes to local storage and session storage. It's a single event that works for both types of change. Okay, so when you handle that event, you are handling both local storage changes and session storage changes. So handle storage is the name of my event handler function, and it's down here on line 28. And as you can see, it takes an event argument. I've called it E in this example, and that parameter has 5 properties that tell you information about the change. So I'll scroll the example down a bit so you can sort of see what's going to come up as we go through the code. The event parameter, I've called it E, has a storage area property, and that will give you either local storage or session storage to indicate what area has changed. Have you changed something in local storage, or have you changed something in session storage? Then there's a URL property, and that will tell you the URL of the page that made the change. There's a key property, and that tells you the key of the item that's changed. So that could be name or city, for example. And then there's an old value and a new value property that will tell you what the value was and what the value is, depending on what kind of event has occurred. So let's see how we use that information. I've set up a string variable here called message, and I'm going to build that up as we progress through the code in this function. So the message eventually will contain this kind of information. It'll contain the type of storage and the URL that made the change, and whether it's an add or a change or a removal, the key and the values. So all of that is going to be built up in this message variable over here. So it's empty initially. And the first thing we do here is to determine what kind of storage has changed. So we take the storage area property on the event argument, and we test to see if it's local storage. And if so, we display a message to say, well, something's changed in local storage, and it was modified by, that's the URL of the page that made the change. So if it's not local storage, then it must be session storage. So we display a message like that in that case. And then the next bit of code is quite interesting, actually. It's from lines 41 through to lines 52. This is the code that determines what kind of change has happened. So take a look at this. I take the event argument, and if the old value is null and the new value is null, the only way that can happen is if it's because you've cleared all the items. It means there was no particular old value and there was no particular new value. So that must be, if you think about it, that we've cleared all the items. So we display a message like so. On line 44 through to line 46, the next possibility, if the old value is null, that means the item didn't have a value before, but it does have a value now, then that must be because you've added a new value. So we display a message here that says I've added a new item, that's the key of the new item, and that's the new value of the new item. Okay, next bit is where we check for removals. So if the new value is null, then it must be because the item's been removed. There was an old value, but there's no value now. So we must have removed an item. So we display a message indicating the old value that's been removed. So you must use old value here, the value that it used to be. It doesn't have a value anymore, obviously, because we've just removed it. So you must use old value if you want to actually get the value that's been removed. And the final option would be that we've changed an item. So this bit of code here displays a message that indicates the key of the item that's changed, the old value of the item, and the new value of the item. Over those lines of code, we build up a message, and then the last few lines add that item into the unordered list. So we create a new list item element, and we set its text to be the message that we've just built up, and then we append that list item into the unordered list on the screen. Okay, so that's shown how you can handle events. The code is exactly the same whether you're handling events on local storage or on session storage. So to illustrate that, I've got another example that shows how to add items to session storage, and it'll be the same code here that'll handle those events. So let me show you the code that illustrates session storage changes. I'll just refresh the view. I'll add an item into session storage called country, and I'll type in Cymru. Cymru is the Welsh name for Wales. Store item. So it determines, there's an item from a previous run, it determines that session storage has changed, and I've added a new item, and that's the key, and that's the value. If I change Cymru to be Wales, then it tells me an item has changed. So country was Cymru, and now it's Wales. If I click remove, then it removes the item from session storage that was country in Wales. And if I clear items, then it indicates that like so. So let me show you the code for this example, session storage events.html. Okay, so most of this code is fairly routine. The code shows how to store items, remove items, clear them, and display them from session storage. And then the interesting stuff is down here on line 56. As you can see here, I have an iframe. So inside my main page, I've embedded an iframe. It's light blue. So everything we saw here, this area, all of this is an iframe. And it contains the handling events HTML file. That's the same file as we saw earlier, the file that contains all of the message handling. Okay, so this iframe will be capable of detecting session storage changes on this page, plus any local storage events that have occurred from pages on the same domain. So that concludes the example. We've seen how you can detect changes on local storage and on session storage by using the onStorage event. You define an event handler function, and the event parameter has properties that indicate the storage area, session storage or local storage. It'll tell you the URL of the page that made the change. It'll tell you the old value and the new value plus the key that's been modified.